I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Hey guys, so we are doing something a little bit different this time. I'm pre-recording an analysis and we're going to be looking at a documentary. Actually, we're going to be asking the question, what is the number 3 clue we all missed, right? What is the number 3 clue we all missed? And in the 1998 documentary, the Ramseys sat down to be interviewed for a documentary called JonBenet's American. So essentially what they're doing in this documentary is they are providing within their own setting, within controlling the narrative, obviously, but what they're doing is telling the narrative on their own terms. And so they not going to be really cross-examined in a genuine way. And so what's really interesting is what happens when they tell the narrative in their own terms. And so like their book, The Death of Innocence, JonBenet's America was supposed to show why the parents couldn't possibly be guilty, why they were above suspicion. In other words, it was apologia, right? Now, incredibly, at around the 16-minute mark of the 54-minute documentary, both Ramseys, both Patsy and John, describe at some length how they responded to finding the ransom note. So it's a very simple thing that we're going to look at and analyze here. How do they describe finding the note? What is their reaction to finding the ransom note? But something is missing from both their stories. And so we're going to go through this in a sort of 3-tiered way. We're going to go through it without sound, with sound and footage, and then I'm going to ask you, what do you think that thing is that is missing? Okay. And so we're going to go to JonBenet's America. It came out in 1998. Let's have a look at it.
So I was fussing around there with some clothes and, glanced at her door, and the door was closed, I mean, I always left it ajar.
So there you already have a little bit of an inconsistency. Patsy's saying, I glanced at her door, it was closed, and then she says it was ajar. She kind of interrupts herself or corrects herself. Well, it's quite simple. Was the door closed or open? And you kind of got to think, why, if the Ramseys are innocent, why would it be so important that the door is open or closed? If the Ramseys are guilty, what is the importance of the door being closed or open? And I would say that you would imagine the door would be open, in other words, found open, if the person who had taken JonBenet had basically gone in there and then taken out, carrying her out. Why is he going to close the door, right? That would certainly be quite strange. On the other hand, if the door is closed, then I guess you could say, well, you're not noticing that she's not there, I guess. But anyway, that's not what we had to assess. We had to assess the response to the ransom note, and we're going to start with Patsy's response.
I just started downstairs. There were these pieces of paper lying on one of the runs
What
of
a lot
the
of
stair.
people don't realize is when Patsy gives her assessment of the ransom note, what is conveniently overlooked is she never really talks about handling the ransom note. Bear in mind, no fingerprints were found on the ransom note. Now, I've dealt with this a couple of times. It shouldn't be news to you, but bear that in mind when you hear her describing the ransom note. Do you ever hear her saying that she picked it up? Do you ever hear her saying that she then went to the second page and then went to the third page? Do you ever hear her basically saying that she read the ransom note? Or do you get kind of the impression that she didn't read the ransom note?
So I kind of turned around and looked at it to see what it was, and
Now, the other thing to bear in mind is it's 5:30 in the morning. It's quite late at night. And so wouldn't you turn on the light? You know, you've been given this vital clue from an abductor, and aren't you going to, in order to find out what is going on, aren't you going to, first of all, pick up the note? It's on the ground. Aren't you going to pick it up? And aren't you going to read it? And aren't you going to want to read it because it's handwritten in light? So aren't you going to turn a light on and then read, right? Of course, none of this has got to do with what we're talking about here, which is a reaction, but it's nevertheless important context. The things that don't happen, that you'd expect to happen. Pick up the note, thereby leaving prints on it. Handling the note, thereby reading the rest of the note, also leaving prints on it. But also you would turn on the light. And I'm going to turn off the volume here. And I want you to take note of, not right here in a moment, I want you to take note of Patsy's response. Just look at the expression on her face here, where she's remembering the whole ransom note.
started reading the first couple lines. It just kind of wasn't registering. But somewhere
so what is really being
it said,
confirmed here
"We
is
have
that
your
she
daughter."
doesn't read
It
the whole
clicked.
ransom note. It's 3 pages. She only reads, I guess, the first paragraph. And if you think about it, this is the blueprint telling, and for the next several hours, they're apparently not gonna know where JonBenet is. When do they ever read the ransom note? You never really hear sort of a thing about, well, they read the first few lines, then they ran around the house, and then they read the rest of the ransom note. You kind of get the sense from both Patsy and John that they read the first few lines, accepted it almost like 100%. I'm convinced by these first few lines. I don't even know who wrote it. I'm convinced that this is where JonBenet is. I'm instantly convinced. You know, I'm not wondering whether it's a ploy by Burke. I'm not. I'm absolutely convinced that what this note says is true, right? And most people wouldn't work that way. Most people would respond in a different way. And that is also a little bit of an inconsistency to say it wasn't registering, but then on the other hand, you immediately get it. You get the message of the ransom note, which is that JonBenet has been taken. And that is like immediately confirmed. You know, it's the speed at which, and this is a clue to the reaction, the speed at which the Ramseys accept the truth of the note, which they hardly even read, is, if you think about it, astonishing.
It said, "We have your daughter." It clicked.
Right? And this is where take note of Patsy's body language here and her expression. Right? So let's have a look.
No, your daughter. And I
So
just,
did you see a moment later, she said it wasn't registering, and then she says it clicked. And what she means by that is she suddenly realized that JonBenet had been kidnapped. Now, why would you, first of all, not really read a note, not turn the light on, and basically kind of realize just on the basis of that sentence that JonBenet has been kidnapped? You've read it, but you haven't confirmed it. JonBenet could very well be still in her bed, or for that matter, still in the house. And guess what? She was actually still in the house. So why would it click? Now, what's kind of going on here is Patsy's warding off in her narrative the necessity to kind of go and look for JonBenet. What I'm trying to say is, because they accept, and it's not just Patsy, it's John as well, because they accept the contents of the ransom note, again, without actually reading it, they then don't need to search the house because they've accepted it at face value. And this is where the question is, does their reaction actually make sense? But there's a very important clue that we've all missed that that is even more basic than all that. Look at Patsy's expression in that particular part of the footage. It clicked. JonBenet has been kidnapped. And you kind of see her very dramatically showing herself basically panicking, right? And this is the part, this part now is the part where you really want to look at what she says she does, and this is her reaction to, we have your daughter. And what is the part that is missing that should be here?
Bounded back up the steps and threw her door open, and she was not in her bed.
So I'll tell you one of the things that it is, but not the thing. Patsy, remember, Patsy's found the ransom note on the floor, right, of the last, not on the floor, on the last stair, right? She said that. And although it seems to be implied here that she picked the note up, she doesn't pick the note up, otherwise there would be fingerprints on it. And so what actually happens here is Patsy must have stepped over the note. Because she didn't pick it up, she must have stepped over the note to go up the stairs. But there's something else that's missing. I just want to confirm with you that she does say the note, all 3 pages are side by side on the stair. So let's go back to that.
These pieces of paper lying on one of the runs of the stair.
So what she's kind of already saying, it sounds like, is that she stepped over the note to get in front of it, then turned around and looked at it. And now the note is on that bottom tread, each page side by side. Just go back a little bit further.
These pieces of paper lying on one of the runs of the stair.
So there's no doubt that Patsy's saying the ransom note was on the stair, right? It wasn't on the ground floor, it was on the stair. And so she says pieces of paper. She's not really explicit to say 3, but the fact that she doesn't, and John doesn't either, need to actually handle it does suppose that the pages are side by side. And certainly my understanding of the way that it's been described and how you see it shown in other documentaries is you see the pages side by side, basically covering the whole stair. But the problem with that is she's got to step over the note to get around to see it right side up, right? Then she's on the floor, kind of in the kitchen area. Then she actually needs to step over it again. And who would do that? Even if you, how can I put it? Even if you didn't wish to read the note, you would very likely either step onto the note, or you would, if you didn't want to step on the note, you would kind of put the papers together and then you wouldn't need to step onto the note, if that makes sense, right? So can you see there's already just a serious problem with how the ransom note is received? And there are two ways of interpreting it. Either the Ramseys are telling the truth and it's just a strange situation, or if it's not the truth, then there was never this. Why would you need to read the ransom note if you wrote it, right? And perhaps perhaps that is why it has a bit of a fictional, not quite credible element to it. Perhaps, right?
And I just remember screaming to John. He was still upstairs dressing.
So this is where we have the beginning of a serious problem. Patsy instantly realizes that JonBenet is missing, and she's only looked in JonBenet's bedroom. JonBenet could be somewhere else. JonBenet could be in the bathroom of her bedroom. JonBenet could be in Burke's room. JonBenet could be in the kitchen eating pineapple. JonBenet could be in the lounge under the Christmas tree playing with a gift. JonBenet could be in the lounge watching television. JonBenet could be even hiding in her bedroom. JonBenet could be just somewhere else in the house. And as it is, JonBenet is actually in the house. And all Patsy does is looks in JonBenet's bedroom, doesn't go to Burke's bedroom, where she occasionally does sleep, doesn't find out from Burke, doesn't even wake Burke up, screams for John, and apparently that doesn't wake Burke up either. So she says she screams for John, and right now we're going to deal with what John says, but there's something already that's missing from this reaction. Let's now deal with John's reaction, and it's also got the same thing missing.
I knew something was very wrong.
So John is going to tell you
down
that he came down the stairs.
She had the note.
And remember, Patsy hasn't, in terms of her own story, hasn't picked up the note. So the note is still where it was left on the first rung of the stairs. So how does John deal with it? First of all, does John look in JonBenet's bedroom? Because he's got to come past her bedroom to do that. Or does he accept what Patsy's told him at face value? What is the first thing that John does? Also, when John reads the note, does he also do what's quite strange? Does he not reach the note, pick it up, and then take the final step or two down to the kitchen floor? Or does he step over the note and then end up somehow reading the note? Well, you're going to find out what he says.
Came down and she had the note.
So what do you think that means when he says she had the note, Patsy had the note? How do you have the note? Now, the way I would understand it is to say Patsy held the note. The note was in Patsy's possession, meaning Patsy was holding the note, but Patsy never held the note. There were no fingerprints of Patsy on the note. And when the officer came in, a lot of people don't know this, when the officer came in to the Ramsey home, he found the note on the floor, not on the tread of the stairs, on the floor. And so you don't even have them handing the officer the note. And by the way, even the officer didn't pick up the note. As far as I know, I think he saw the note, and I think it was eventually put into a plastic bag. I could be wrong on that score, but I mean, even the officer's fingerprints aren't on the note. It's possible the officer handled the note with gloves, but certainly in the video recreation, in the Lawrence Schiller narrative, I think it's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, the Lifetime movie, the way that is reconstructed, the officer never actually picks the note up. The note is still kind of on the floor. I could be wrong on that. It could be that the officer does pick the note up, but with gloves on. Certainly in the beginning, the note is on the floor and they're referring to the note on the floor. again, why wouldn't Patsy not hand the note to John? Why would John not handle the note? And also, why wouldn't one of the two Ramseys hand the note to the officer? Obviously, an officer at a certain point does collect the note, right? It is collected off the floor, not in a way that would suggest that it's been read. How can I put it? Like you'd read something and put the note on a table. The note's kind of on the floor. And now John's going to talk about him reading the note.
And I read it just, quickly trying to.
So he's saying the
everything
same
in and
thing as Patsy, that
I
although it's a
screamed.
You don't know what-
three-page note, he reads it quickly. You kind of get the idea that he doesn't read the whole note. He doesn't check who it's from. He doesn't read it to completion. He also very quickly accepts the veracity of the note and then goes to the next step. What is the next step? What should the next step be?
I screamed.
You don't know what to do.
You're in
What
agony.
do we do? I don't, you're
And
just,
I think this part
don't know
is
where to
really,
you
start.
don't know
really
what to
interesting.
do. You're just in.
This is where you
Insane.
have both John and Patsy in the same frame, essentially saying how they responded to the note. Patsy says she screams. John also says he screams. And then they seem to both say, we didn't know what to do. And so my question to you is, if you were confronted with a situation, here's a ransom note.
You don't know where to
You
start.
don't know what to do. You're just insane.
What would you do? Think about that, but we're going to first just deal with this moment in a little bit slower fashion. John gets the note. What does he do? So John also says he screamed. And so am I right when I say Patsy said she screamed and John said he screamed? If you think I'm not, go back through the video and check. The reason why this is important is if John and Patsy screamed, then at about 5:30 in the morning, there's a little boy in the house, apparently sleeping, and both his parents scream, and they're sort of running up and down the stairs. And that is quite strange that both parents scream, and apparently the little boy, A, doesn't wake up, and B, if he does wake up, doesn't come and say what's going on. And C, if his parents come into his room, which they apparently do, and Burke would later go on Dr. Phil and say that Patsy came in and said, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" Why would he not participate in the search? Also, why would they not sort of recruit him into finding his sister, looking for his sister? And so what's really interesting here is this idea that based on not even reading the note, basically just reading a paragraph, both John and Patsy have the same response. They both scream and they both accept the note immediately. And you've kind of got to ask the question from John as well. John, when you read that, why wouldn't you confirm that JonBenet isn't in the house before you scream and before you accept it? In other words, go to JonBenet's room, go to Burke's room, go kind of start going through the house, right? Let's see what he says. So again, the question kind of arises, what should they do? And what is the obvious answer? What's the obvious answer? You are confronted with a note on the one hand, and on the other hand, the note says that JonBenet isn't where she's supposed to be. What would most people do? Now I'm going to show the following scene without the audio, just to show you how Patsy is kind of just fluttering. She's kind of saying, we were in a panic and we didn't know what to do. And I'm first going to play it without the audio. Just pay attention to the body language here. Look at Patsy, basically saying, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. John shaking his head. Patsy's kind of doing this, right? We don't know what to do, right? Let me show that to you again. Patsy's saying, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. Let's watch it again. Right? And apparently they don't know what to do. And so can I offer a suggestion? And I don't know whether it's unreasonable. The suggestion is, on the one hand, wouldn't you read the note? You are confronted with a note and maybe you don't know what to do. Well, guess what? The note tells you what to do, right? The other thing is, the note is telling you something. Why would you believe it instantly? Why would you read it and just scream and then not know what to do? And actually, the thing is, you read a little fragment of the note, scream, and you don't know what to do. Because the reality is, I think anyone would know what to do. What would you do? You would search for JonBenet. That's still not the thing that's missing, the number 3 clue we all missed. I'll tell you what it is in a moment. But you would search for JonBenet. Where would you search for her? John doesn't seem to go back to JonBenet's room, which is, you would imagine people going into a room several times. Go into a room, look under the bed, look in the bathroom, open the cupboards. But the most important thing, what would it be? What would you do? Also, go now into a whole list of rooms that are likely. Burke's room, Burke's bathroom, the kitchen, the lounge. And then from there you would go to less likely places in the home, such as the study, the garage, the basement. And you would imagine that all of that would be done. Then you confirm that JonBenet is not in the house whatsoever. Both parents looking everywhere, Burke looking everywhere, everyone in the house looking everywhere, making absolutely certain that she's not there. Then you believe the contents of the note. Then and even perhaps looking outside, right? They don't even look outside. JonBenet could actually be outside. She got a new bicycle. She could be out. And I mean, you need to connect the circumstances of this family to the circumstances in reality. Where could JonBenet be? Well, she's got a little dog. Is she with a dog? She's got a bicycle for Christmas. Is she riding the bicycle? Where's the bicycle? All that kind of thing. And yet they don't do any of that. They simply read the note, the first paragraph, and on the basis of that, they accept it. And then they're like, we didn't know what to do. Well, it's quite obvious what to do. You would search for JonBenet. And only when you've found that she is nowhere and you've searched everywhere that you possibly can, you could even go to the neighbor because she had a little dog there, then you would call the police. You wouldn't call the police immediately. And obviously, them calling the police immediately is a convenient way for them not to have to search the house. But nobody would accept a note. If you found a note like that in your house, you wouldn't believe the note over reality. You might think, and you might hope that the note is a joke or some kind of mistake or some kind of prank, perhaps even but you'd basically want to confirm for yourself that it wasn't true. So the speed at which they accept the note is astonishing. And let's also face it, the note isn't actually true because JonBenet hasn't been kidnapped. JonBenet is still in the house. And so what they're trying to convey to us is that we must, through their story, we must also, it must click in our minds, and we must also accept that JonBenet has been taken. That's not really thinking critically. First, make sure she has been taken, and guess what? She hasn't been taken. And if you'd just done a proper search of the house, you would have found that out.
Somebody asked me later what was the worst moment in all of this, and that was the
And
worst
this
moment.
is also, to me, a little difficult to accept. Is John saying the worst moment for him was getting this note, right? Because he doesn't even read the note. He reads a few lines of it. And again, it's in terms of his story, he apparently accepts the contents of the note, and that is the worst thing in terms of this whole story. And remember, this apologia, this documentary came out in 1998. So if you say this is the worst thing 2 years later, right? Is it really the worst thing? I mean, wouldn't the worst thing be finding JonBenet, actually finding her, and she's no longer alive? I mean, the note kind of suggests that she's still alive. So the note, there's some hope in that. So why on earth would the note be worse than JonBenet? Like, why would the note saying something which wasn't even true, we have your daughter, wasn't even true, why would that be worse than actually finding JonBenet in their home and she's not alive? Really? Why would finding a note, and it's such a terrible thing, but you don't even bother to read it?
Was suddenly realizing that someone had your daughter, your child.
So that's the worst moment. He suddenly realizes it. I don't know whether in reality it would be a sudden realization. I think you would realize it once you tested whether it was true. And guess what? What he's saying there isn't actually true in actuality. No one had his daughter. His daughter never left the house. So the note says, we have your daughter, but the daughter never left the house. So she was never gone. She was never missing. She was never taken, right? And so this moment that for him is the worst moment turns out to be a fictional moment in the reality of the reality.
And it's taken her, and she was gone, and we didn't know where she was.
But the thing is, she
it was
wasn't
dark.
taken
It was cold outside.
from the house. That's what a kidnapping is. She wasn't gone from the house. She was still in the house. And if you think about it, the ransom note was all supposed to do that. It was designed that you don't look for JonBenet and that you accept that she's not in the house. They did. And isn't the idea that whoever reads the ransom note thinks that JonBenet is taken, gone, not in the house, and the person responsible is someone from outside the house? But it turns out that she's still in the house. And I mean, isn't that the ultimate clue to the Ramsey case? Without knowing anything about the case, you've got a ransom note saying JonBenet is taken, that is suggesting outsiders and that JonBenet is gone. But it turns out that JonBenet is in her house all along. So what kind of kidnapper would do that? It's something that isn't something.
And it's taken her, and she was gone, and we didn't know where she was, and it was dark. It was cold outside.
So what John is saying there is the reason why it was so upsetting, reading the ransom note that we have your daughter, he then he reinforces it by saying, well, it was dark and it was cold. Well, you can turn the lights on, and the sun was actually just about to come up. Let me go back to that.
And she was gone, and we didn't know where she was, and it was dark. It was cold outside.
So he's saying when they read in the note, "We have your daughter," that was the most horrible moment for him. And then he reinforces that. That should be enough. But he reinforces it, saying, also, it was dark and it was cold and we didn't know where she was. Guess what? One of the ways to have resolved that we didn't know where she was is look for her, right? In the same way, they don't seem to bother to read the note. They don't really seem to bother to look for her. It's certainly not a systematic search by all three people in the house, where they search everywhere in the house, because if they did, they would have found her. And then they also search beyond the house, because there are all sorts of nooks and crannies outside. Where's her bicycle? Did she go to Joe Barnhill? If they're about to go on holiday, maybe JonBenet wants to say goodbye to her dog. That would be understandable. And so they don't do any of those things. They just accept the note. But there's still something very important that is missing from all of this. And it's the most obvious thing of all.
I said, I'm going to call the police. And he said, okay. And I think he ran to check on Burke. And I ran downstairs and, dialed 911.
So Patsy, and again, bear in mind, this is in a way the Ramseys interviewing themselves, right? This is a apologia where they basically deal with all the criticisms and questions that came up, right? And in this thing where they're now dealing with their reaction to the ransom note, Patsy says, I think John went to check on Burke in the story. And so the question is, Patsy, didn't you go and check on Burke? When you went from the note to JonBenet's room, and that does make sense. But did you go into a bathroom? Why didn't you go from there right into the room next door, which is the playroom, the obvious place where a lot of children are, or from that room to Burke's room? Why go literally from JonBenet's room to John, and John then comes straight down, according to this telling of the story, reads the note, and John doesn't seem to do any searching before 911 is called. John seems to accept the note even quicker than Patsy does. John doesn't seem, in this version of events, to search anywhere in the house. The only one that does a little bit of searching is Patsy, going to JonBenet's room. While Patsy's on the phone, John goes, so like literally, it's almost like they've decided, look, we're not going to find JonBenet. John, while I'm on the phone, you go to Burke's room. And funny enough, there was a rumor, or there's a speculation, that while Patsy was on the phone, you could hear possibly one or two individuals in the background, John and possibly Burke, right? And so John was with Burke in Patsy's telling of events here, just not where some people have speculated that he was. But none of that makes sense, that John would only check on Burke almost in a perfunctory way, right? You would think that before calling 911, they would have woken Burke up if he wasn't awake already from all the screaming, checked his room, checked his bathroom, checked the second bed that's in the room, and also checked with Burke. Burke, wake up. Have you seen your sister? Because the most obvious witness, the most obvious person to give them information on that would be Burke, because he slept on the same floor as JonBenet, and he could have been the last person to see JonBenet alive if she'd gone into his bedroom, or he'd gone into her bedroom, or they'd gone down to have a midnight snack, or they were playing with their toys together. He may have important information. Mom, no, JonBenet's gone out to ride a bicycle. She didn't want to wake you. Mom, JonBenet went to go and say goodbye to Jacques, right? Burke might know that, right? And so, but they don't even seem to take that step. Burke's virtually not even part of this story.
We had no choice. I mean, I would have gone mad sitting there hoping someone
So
would
he
call.
says, I would have gotten mad sitting there, but you didn't need to sit there. You could have searched, and the whole thing could have been sorted out within very short time. I mean, how long would it take to search the whole house? When Linda Orange said search the whole house, how long did it take to find JonBenet? Less than 5 minutes. So he didn't need to go mad. He just needed to do what anyone would do, search for JonBenet. We still haven't answered the question. What is the obvious thing you would do if you were confronted with this ransom note? The first thing, what would you do?
Would have gone absolutely mad. You had to do something. I mean, I was ready to call out the Russian army, the
And
National
so,
Guard,
yeah, John
close
said
the
something
airport,
really
let's close,
strange.
cordon off the city.
I don't know whether he really means it, and I don't know whether we're supposed to make something out of it. But
Would have
listen
gone
to what he
absolutely mad.
says.
You had to do something. I mean, I was ready to call out the Russian army,
He
the
says
National
you
Guard,
had to do
close
something.
the airport, let's
Okay,
close,
yes.
cordon off the city.
And so now he really goes over the top.
Would have gone absolutely mad.
And listen to what he says.
You had to do something. I mean, I was ready to call out the
Like,
Russian army.
why
the
does
National-
he want to call out the Russian army? The Russian army, why wouldn't you call out the American army? I mean, for goodness sake, his business is associated with Lockheed Martin, which is a defense contractor with American forces. Why does he mention the Russian army? And like, why do you want to call out the Russian army before you've even searched your own home, right? Anyway, I think I've belabored the point. A lot of this seems to be quite strange. To me, the strangest part is this. What would be the first thing you would do if you were confronted with this notion that JonBenet, that your child isn't in a bed? I would argue that the first thing you would do is you would call JonBenet. You would shout for JonBenet. You would go through the house calling her name, because if she was in the house, then she would respond. And why wouldn't she be in the house? And guess what? She was actually in the house, right? So the amazing thing is that Patsy gets the note and doesn't even call out JonBenet's name when she's in JonBenet's room. And you would imagine if JonBenet was in the house, just not in her bedroom, the quickest way to summon JonBenet would be to call her. Why on earth would you go through the entire house if that's what you intended to do? Why would you go through the entire house and not call her name? And by the way, Chris Watts did exactly the same thing. When Chris Watts was summoned back from work and Chris Watts went into his home, and by the way, Chris Watts murdered his family, right? And so when he goes into the house and now ostensibly he's looking for his family in front of Nicole Atkinson and the officer, right? But he's looking without calling anyone's name. He goes down the basement stairs, he goes upstairs, he looks around. But guess what? He doesn't actually call her name. Why doesn't he call her name? Well, isn't it because there's no point in calling her name, because he's just buried his family? So it would be stupid, based on that knowledge, to call out her name to call out their names, because you know where they are. They're not alive. So why are you going to call out their name? And the question here is it the same thing here or not? Because you would imagine, why wouldn't Patsy calls to John. Patsy says she screams. John says he screams. So it's not a question of, I don't want to wake anybody up. Why wouldn't you call JonBenet's name? Why wouldn't that be the first thing you did? In other words, get the ransom note, go to JonBenet's room, get the ransom note, call for JonBenet. JonBenet, are you here? Like, is this note legitimate or not? And calling her name immediately and JonBenet answering would immediately counterfeit that. And if JonBenet didn't answer, then you'd go to a room, but you'd still call her name. And you'd go through the house still calling her name, because JonBenet could just be in another room. Or JonBenet could be outside. And another way, if you called outside, JonBenet could be across the street or just out of sight. You would call her name. And that is the one thing that's missing. They call the police. Patsy also doesn't even listen or deal with the operator who says, Patsy, 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 tell me more. I don't think she even mentions JonBenet's name in that call. She just says she's 6 years old, blonde. Why does she need to get off the phone very quickly? And if you think the reason is, well, because she needs to search the house, does Patsy end up searching the house ever? Does John end up searching the whole house? And I think he does say at some point that he did search, but the bottom line is, if either of them had searched, they would have found her. If either of them or both of them had searched their own house, they would have found JonBenet. But the number 3 clue we've all missed is that the reasonable man, the reasonable person in this situation would call the name out of this person when confronted with the idea that they were missing. Don't you agree with that? Don't you agree that if you were led to believe that someone had been taken, the first thing you want to do is find out if that's true? You wouldn't just accept that it's true, right? And I can tell you, I recently got a note in my mailbox saying something about that dogs aren't allowed, right? In where I live, dogs aren't allowed. I didn't just immediately accept what the note said. I mean, I read it, and then I made a few calls, and I didn't immediately accept what the note said, and I still have my dog because what that note said, I don't think it is legitimate. So why would somebody else do that? Why would you accept a note from outside telling you what the reality is inside your house? Wouldn't you first actually determine that reality? Anyway, food for thought. I hope you found this analysis interesting. I do want to play one more time Patsy's response, where she says, you don't know what to do. I think you would know what to do. You would, first of all, get the note, pick it up, turn on the light, read it. Then you would call JonBenet's name and look for her, and then get everyone calling JonBenet's name and looking for her, and ultimately they would have found her where she was left. That would be, to me, normal behavior. Does that make sense? Instead, you get Patsy basically just doing this like you don't know what to do.
I scream.
I mean, you don't know what to do.
You're
You know,
agony.
what do we do? I don't, I mean, you're just,
You don't know where to
you
start.
don't know
I mean,
what to
it's-
do. You're just in.
So I just want you to keep that picture in your mind of Patsy. You can't think fast enough, but yet they've accepted that JonBenet is kidnapped, so they have thought fast enough. We have your daughter. JonBenet is kidnapped. That's pretty quick thinking. Call the police. Pretty quick thinking. So she's kind of talking about almost being paralyzed. And what's quite interesting here is, look at Patsy dramatizing the thing of, I can't think, I don't know what is happening. And John, look at John looking at the cameraman. He almost seems to be gauging his reaction. And John says, we don't know where to start. But the most interesting thing with this particular moment is how John is talking about the whole thing, and he seems to get a little, I don't know if it's lost or it gets, the conversation kind of runs out, and then Patsy picks up the
I
slack.
scream.
I mean, you don't know what to
You're
do.
in agony.
What do we do? I don't, I mean, you're just,
You don't know where to
you
start.
don't know
I mean,
what to
it's-
do. You're just in.
So he reads it quickly. He's trying to take it in. And then he screams, and then Patsy kind of takes over. What else is John going to say? Well, John needs to say, well, then I actually looked for JonBenet. But Patsy kind of takes over and says, we don't know what to do. Is it really that difficult? Look for JonBenet. Call out her name.
I screamed.
I mean, you don't know what to
You were
do.
in
You know,
agony.
what do we do? I don't, you know.
And
I mean,
so
you're
here
just
you're saying, you know,
don't
we're
know
in
where to
agony.
start.
Don't know
We
what
don't
to-
know what to do. But it's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious what to do.
I mean, you're just,
You don't know where to
you
start.
don't know
I mean,
what to
it's-
do. You're just
And it's
insane.
very dramatic. Oh, we don't know what to do. It's really not that complicated. It's really not that complicated. And so they say this over and over again. We don't know what to do. You don't know where to start. I don't get the feeling, just separate from all of this, I don't get the feeling the Ramseys are indecisive people. I don't get the feeling that they're overwhelmed by things and don't know what to do. I mean, look at what did happen. They hired a team. They went onto CNN. They wrote a book. You had the whole grand jury thing that went the way that it went. You have the very responsive Ramseys today dealing with all these things in the media. You don't really get a sense that they don't know what to do. In fact, you get the sense that they know exactly what to do every step of the way. John is a former CEO of a big successful company. He knows what to do. In stressful situations, he knows what to do. Patsy's a beauty queen who would be on stage with a lot of people around her, and the pressure, the competition and so on. Never mind putting JonBenet into pageants and choreographing all of that. But the point being, when Patsy's on stage, does she not know what to do, or does she always know exactly what to do? And so if you think about that, does it make sense that in this particular situation that they had no idea what to do? So food for thought. All of the little snippets from this come from JonBenet's America. It came out in 1998. And obviously following that, the Ramseys appeared to be, I guess, exonerated, that the grand jury didn't vote to indict them. Of course, it turned out that something else was the case. If you enjoyed the format of this particular video, let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.